Hello there. Well, who'd put money on Italy remaining a part of the eurozone or even the European Union right now? I wouldn't. Firstly, as ever, please kick that YouTube algorithm up the jacksie by giving this video a big fat like. And I'm always uploading new content, so please do check my YouTube channel daily. Now, doesn't all that talk of EU unity sound so 2019 right now? During the whole Brexit thing since 2016, the likes of Juncker, Tusk, Verhostadt and Barnier talking about how solidly together the EU and eurozone were. All echoed by our very own homegrown Remainiacs like Clarke, Hammond, Clegg, Blair and the rest. Remember them? All fading nightmare memories now, of course. The EU 27 is as one, they claim, until the brown stuff hits the circulating air redistributor. And this global health crisis has provided the brown stuff, and the eurozone and EU response to it has provided the fan. So much so that a major rift has taken place, a rift that threatens to result in one of the largest EU member states deciding that it has had enough and does its own form of Brexit. And that member state is, of course, Italy. The Italians feel completely let down by Brussels and the other member states, and Euroscepticism within the country is growing by the day, to the point that an Italexit looks to be on the cards. And the main problem, as I've talked about before, is that the Eurozone members cannot agree to issue Euro bonds to pay for this crisis. Because that would mean sharing out the debt of those affected amongst every one of the 19 Eurozone states, something the likes of Germany and the Netherlands are bitterly opposed to. So all they've managed to cobble together is an agreement that Italy can borrow money from the European Stability Mechanism. Just more debt for Italy to finance on its own. And Italy probably didn't take too kindly to this being heralded by some Eurogroup finance ministers as some sort of historic breakthrough. The Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, called it a totally inadequate tool, as well as a trap, and it looks like he will reject the offer of a line of credit based on the ESM. The Italian Prime Minister has also threatened to block the planned video summit of EU leaders next week unless they agree to share the crisis debt out amongst them. "We will fight for Eurobonds," he said. "The ESM is a totally inadequate and improper instrument for the emergency we are facing." He had already previously warned that this crisis was a big challenge to the existence of Europe. If Europe fails to come up with a monetary and financial policy adequate for the biggest challenge since World War II, not only Italians but European citizens will be deeply disappointed. If we do not seize the opportunity to put new life into the European project, the risk of failure is real. And Italian MEP Adinolfi said, "The EU response to the crisis has been inadequate. It would be better to leave Brussels. If this is what the EU is about, perhaps it is better to collect signatures for the referendum to abandon Brussels." With the former head of the European Research Council, Italian Mauro Ferrari, saying, "I have been extremely disappointed by the European response. For what pertains to the complete absence of coordination of healthcare policies amongst member states, the recurrent opposition to cohesive financial support initiatives, the pervasive one-sided border closures, and the marginal scale of synergistic scientific initiatives." Now, Italy already has a debt-to-GDP ratio of well over 100%, compared to those northern Euro states whose ratios are nearer 60%. So Italian debt will grow larger and get more expensive to service. Already Italian bond yields are rising, i.e. the price of Italian bonds trading on the markets has fallen because not so many people want them. Italy is hurting and has asked for help, but has seen virtually nothing. Now, earlier in April, the EU Civil Protection Mechanism did send some doctors and nurses to Italy, and other countries have helped with medical supplies. But this may have been in response to criticisms after Russia, China, and even Cuba fronted up with aid for Italy. But there is also the issue that if Italy is unable to deal with this crisis due to the lack of funds, this could well result in the northern EU states being hit even harder by the health crisis. And the mayor of Stasima in Tuscany, Maurizio Verona, wrote to Angela Merkel saying that the next victim of this crisis would be Europe, unless there was more solidarity between states. Brexiteer Nigel Farage was taking questions on his Facebook page about all of this, and he said that the many Italians he had spoken to said that the general mood was swinging more towards the country leaving the EU. He also promised the Italians that he would help in any way he could if they decided to leave. A big political change is happening already, he said. I've had several conversations with Italians this week. The mood now in Italy to leave the European Union is growing very, very quickly. And I've said to Italian friends, if I can help you with that, I most certainly will. Now the eurozone looks set to be clobbered by this crisis, with the IMF predicting in its great lockdown report that the European region would be the hardest hit of any in the world, with countries like France and Germany seeing economic contractions of around 7%. But Italy looks on course for a slump of 9% and a rise to nearly 13% unemployment, according to the IMF. And Spain heading for an 8% slump and unemployment to reach over 20%. But overall, those countries most adversely affected by the health crisis are in the south of the EU, and they are also the ones looking set to be hit the hardest by the ensuing economic fallout, with Italy right in the perfect storm zone. And with these sorts of figures, one supposes that the wealthier Eurozone states are far from likely to have a change of heart and put any chance of their own crisis recovery at risk. So you can understand why Italians might be angry at a few of the more unscathed northern states that refuse to take on some of the burden for what is supposed to be a sort of mutual aid club. But when push comes to shove, it isn't. The EU is still just an ad hoc collection of 27 different member states with different aims and different views of the world. It's not really a union of states with a common ambition. It's more a collection of states, each using the EU to its own advantage. And now at least one of them has found it can be a crippling disadvantage to be a member, especially if you're embroiled in the single currency. Now I have to say that I do wonder if this Euroscepticism might not also be shared amongst the wealthier Eurozone states. And the reason I say that is because if they totally believed in the EU, ever closer union and the single currency, they would use this crisis to form the treasury system they need to make a truly superstate EU. But they're not doing that. Is it possible that while the southern states are crying out for what would make the euro a truly single currency, the others see it as a danger to their own more national interests? It's all more me than it is about us. And it also demonstrates a large amount of distrust in their fellow member states and their leaders. Not a good sign for future ever-close togetherness, is it? Now, as far as I can see, the UK does not have that level of disunity regarding this health crisis. Although there was a spat yesterday when it was claimed that PPE kit was being prioritised for England over Scotland, with the BBC reporting that at Ms Sturgeon's daily briefing, she promised to seek urgent clarity on reports that Scottish care homes were being given a lower priority for supplies of personal protective equipment. Claims for PPE priority for England surfaced on Monday and came from Donald McCaskill, the head of Scottish Care, which is the body representing private care homes in Scotland. But a UK government spokesman rebutted it, saying, "Through this four-nation approach, we're working closely with the devolved administrations to coordinate the distribution of PPE evenly across the UK." And the claim was also debunked by Professor Jason Leach, the Scottish Government's clinical director, who said, "We have looked into it and we think it's rubbish," as well as, "So we are in a four-country fight against this virus. Honestly, people might not believe me, but that four countries fight is pretty aligned." Now you do have to wonder where that whole thing originated from, don't you? Anything at any time to try and sow division between Scotland and the rest of the UK, especially England. But if it was an attempt to spark disunity, it fell flat on its face. But with Italy, the EU and the eurozone, things look completely different, don't they? And if Italy does decide it's had enough, then when it leaves it will tear the eurozone and the European Union apart like warm bread. And more worrying for Brussels is that the Italians will have a huge library of expertise at their fingertips in the form of Brexit and the Brexiteers. The EU strategy is laid out and known, most of the likely bear traps identified, and a route through the minefield mapped. And if the Italians do go for an Italexit in-out referendum, I bet Nigel Farage will be on a tour with a battle bus pretty quick. Anyway, if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell, or you won't get any notifications. And if you want to see more of me, buy a mug with my mug on it. So, what do you think about Italy leaving the European Union? Do you reckon it's a goer? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.